As a child, I was humiliated for being slow, poor, and bad diction. The teacher once said in front of the whole class, "Nothing will ever come out of you. You're nothing." 20 years later, I bought the school where she works. I never understood why she hated me. Maybe it was because I was different. Maybe it was because I wasn't like the other kids. But the truth was, I didn't know how to explain myself. I was always the slow one in class, the one who couldn't answer questions as quickly, who couldn't speak as clearly. I stuttered. I had a thick accent that made me feel like an outsider in my own classroom. And Miss Wilson, she noticed. It wasn't the first time I had been humiliated by a teacher, but it was the worst. She had a way of making you feel small, of making you question everything about yourself. I was just a 10-year-old kid, but those words stung like nothing else. It was a Wednesday, the middle of the semester, and I remember sitting in the back of the classroom trying to concentrate on the math problem in front of me. My mind raced, but the numbers blurred together. I couldn't focus. The anxiety of knowing I would be called on next, knowing I would mess it up, it was almost too much to bear. But Miss Wilson, she always seemed to know when I was struggling. She had this way of looking at me, almost like she was waiting for me to fail. And then it came. "Michael," she called out, her voice cold, detached. "What's the answer to question 4?" I froze. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, the blood rushing to my face. Everyone's eyes were on me, and I couldn't even make sense of the problem in front of me. I stuttered, trying to find the words, but they wouldn't come. My heart pounded in my ears. "Michael," she repeated, her voice now sharp, "are you even listening? Or are you just going to waste everyone's time?" I tried to speak, but nothing came out. I could feel the snickers of my classmates, the way they looked at me like I was nothing. And then Miss Wilson spoke again, her words cutting through the silence. "Nothing will ever come out of you. You are an empty place." The room went silent. My face burned with shame, and I wished the ground would swallow me whole. The words echoed in my head over and over again, each one carving itself into my memory. I remember looking at her cold, disapproving gaze, and thinking, "I'll show you. I'll show you that I'm not empty, that I'm not nothing." But that was the moment I realized that this wasn't just about school or grades or proving everyone wrong. It was about something deeper. It was about proving to myself that I was worth something, that I wasn't destined to be a failure. After that day, I tried harder, but it wasn't easy. Every time I picked up a book or tried to study, those words haunted me. "You are an empty place." I dropped out of school when I was 15. I didn't belong there anymore, and I didn't want to be there with people who saw me as nothing. I worked odd jobs just to keep my head above water, cleaning offices, flipping burgers, anything that would pay the bills. But at night, when the world was quiet, I studied. I taught myself what I didn't learn in school: business, finance, anything that might help me escape from the life I felt trapped in. The nights were the hardest. My small apartment was dark, cold, and empty. But I had something to prove. I had to show everyone that I was more than what they saw, more than what she saw. Every hour spent studying, every small victory, was a reminder that I wasn't an empty place. I worked for a few years like this, grinding away, scraping together every dollar I could. I opened my first business when I was 22. It was a small tech startup, and I thought it was the answer to everything. But it failed, miserably. I poured everything I had into it, my time, my energy, my savings, and it crumbled. I felt like I was back at square one, but this time I didn't give up. I couldn't. I had learned something in those early years. Failure wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. And so I picked myself up again. This time I didn't try to do it alone. I found mentors, I networked, I studied harder than ever before. I learned from my mistakes, and slowly I started to build a network of successful businesses. By the time I was 30, I had a few profitable ventures under my belt. By 35, I was a millionaire. But I wasn't just rich in money, I was rich in knowledge, in experience, in the understanding that no one could define me but me. My life wasn't about proving anything to anyone else anymore. It was about proving to myself that I could make something out of nothing. And then one day the opportunity came. I received an email, a proposal to invest in a struggling school. I almost deleted it, assuming it was just another one of those bad investments. But something about it caught my eye. The name of the principal was listed as Miss Wilson. My heart skipped a beat. The same Miss Wilson. The one who had told me I was nothing. The one who had looked at me and seen nothing but a failure. I couldn't resist. I didn't care about the money. This wasn't about a business deal. This was about me showing her that I had become someone, that I wasn't the empty place she thought I was. I agreed to the investment, but I didn't tell them who I was. I wanted to do this anonymously. I didn't want her to know who was behind the deal, not yet. I poured my money into the school, bought out its debts, and took control. I had no intention of letting it go to waste, but I had a plan, and it wasn't just to save the school. It was to make her see. The next few weeks were a blur. I made sure everything was in place. The school's debts were cleared, and a new direction was set. But the part I had been waiting for, the moment when I would meet her again, was finally here. I walked into that school with nothing but a business suit and a quiet smile. I knew exactly who I was, and soon she would too. But I had to be patient. I had to wait for the right moment. And then I saw her, Miss Wilson. Older now, her face tired and worn by the years. Still, she carried herself with that same arrogance, that same belief that she was right about everything. She was still the same woman who had crushed a child's spirit all those years ago. I watched her for a while, observed how she interacted with the teachers, with the students. It was clear that nothing had changed. She was still cold, still unkind. But I didn't care. I wasn't here for her approval anymore. I was here for my own. It was time to introduce myself, but I wasn't going to tell her who I really was, not yet. No, I had something else planned. And when the moment came, I would make sure she understood. The days passed by quickly after I took control of the school. Every corner of the building felt strangely familiar, but in a way, it was different now. The worn walls that had seen so many generations of students, the same classrooms that had once made me feel so small, they now belonged to me. It was a strange feeling, walking through the halls where I had once been humiliated, knowing that I had changed everything. I spent my first few days as the anonymous owner of the school, working with the staff, assessing the financials, making plans for renovations and restructuring. There were whispers among the teachers and staff who seemed surprised by the sudden change. They didn't know who had invested in the school, but they all knew something was different. The atmosphere felt tense, uncertain. But that was part of my plan. Change always starts with discomfort. Every time I passed Miss Wilson in the hallway, she didn't seem to notice me. I wasn't surprised. She was still wrapped up in her world of control and arrogance. Her tired eyes, always scanning the room, never seemed to rest on anyone for too long. She had always been like that. Critical, never satisfied, always looking for something to fix or correct in others. I was certain she didn't recognize me. After all, who would? I wasn't the same awkward, slow kid she had once ridiculed. I had transformed in ways she could never understand, and that was the key. I wasn't here to remind her of the past. I was here to show her how wrong she was about me. The day I decided to reveal myself to the school was coming closer. I had everything in place: the new funding, the rebranding, the support for struggling students. But before I could make my move, I needed to meet her again. I needed to hear her say the words that had followed me all these years. It was late one afternoon when I finally found her alone in her office. The door was cracked open, and I could hear her voice, low and frustrated, as she spoke to someone on the phone. Her tone was sharp, dismissive. "These kids are hopeless. No one can teach them anything. I'm tired of wasting my time on lost causes." I stood outside her door for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. This was who she was. This was what she had always been. A woman who believed that children like me, children who didn't fit her idea of success, were destined to fail. Hopeless. I wanted to walk away then, to just let her be. But something in me, something deep inside, told me I had to face her, to make her see who I had become. I knocked on the door. She looked up from the phone call, eyes narrowing as she saw me standing there. The moment we locked eyes, I knew she had no clue who I was. I wasn't the boy she had humiliated so many years ago. I was a man now, but she still carried that same arrogance, that same belief that she was always right. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice cold. I smiled, letting the silence hang in the air for a moment. There was something satisfying about watching her struggle to place me. I could see her trying to remember, trying to make sense of my face. But I wasn't a kid anymore. I had grown up. "Yes, I'm here on behalf of the investors," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I'm the one who bought the school." Her eyes flickered with surprise, and for the briefest moment, I could see a glimmer of something in them. Perhaps it was fear, or just the realization that everything had changed. She quickly recovered, though, her usual defensive posture returning. "Ah, I see," she said, standing up from her desk, straightening her blouse. "Well, welcome. We're just working through a few things here. I hope you understand that running a school isn't as simple as people think." I nodded, letting her talk. The words didn't matter anymore. What mattered was how she carried herself, how she had never once questioned her own authority, her own beliefs. It was clear to me now that she hadn't changed. The years had passed, but she was still the same woman who saw herself as a teacher above all else. Someone who believed she knew the right way to shape the world, no matter the cost to the children she was supposed to be helping. "You've been here a long time, haven't you?" I asked casually, wanting to keep her talking. 35 years, she replied, her tone somewhat softer, perhaps a bit proud. "I've been through it all. And trust me, these kids today, they're not like they used to be. I'm just trying to keep them in line." I raised an eyebrow. "In line?" She didn't seem to notice my tone. "They don't have the discipline they used to. No respect, no motivation. They're nothing like the students I taught when I started. Back then, we had standards." I could feel the old anger rising in my chest, but I kept my voice level. "And what about me? Was I one of those hopeless kids too?" She stared at me for a moment, then shrugged. "You were always a difficult case, Michael. You couldn't keep up with the others. You didn't speak properly, you didn't get the grades. I had to focus on the kids who had potential. It's not personal, it's just how it is." The words hung in the air, heavy with years of bitterness. She had never seen me. She had never even bothered to try. I let out a small laugh, unable to help myself. "You still don't get it, do you?" Her brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" I stepped forward, closer to her desk, my voice steady but filled with an edge. "You never saw me, Miss Wilson. You thought I was nothing. But I wasn't a lost cause. I was just waiting for the right moment to prove you wrong." Her face flushed with confusion. "What are you trying to say?" I leaned in slightly, my smile growing. "I'm your employer now, Miss Wilson." She stiffened, her eyes widening. For a moment, there was a flicker of fear in her eyes, but she quickly masked it with her usual superiority. "Well, I'll have to see how this changes things," she said with a forced smile. "But don't expect miracles from these kids. They are just as hopeless as you once were." I smiled back, not in anger, but in satisfaction. "And you still didn't understand anything, did you?" With that, I turned and walked out of her office, leaving her to grapple with the weight of my words. The next day, the entire school gathered for a meeting. The staff, the teachers, and the students were all there, curious about the mysterious new owner of the school. I stood on stage, my eyes scanning the crowd. I could feel the tension in the air, the eyes of the faculty on me. But the moment I had waited for had finally arrived. It was time to speak the truth. I cleared my throat. 20 years ago, you broke a child. You told him he was nothing, that he would never amount to anything. But you didn't know that it was a spark. And now I'm here to show you what that spark can become." There was a pause, then a murmur of surprise. But I wasn't finished. I turned to Miss Wilson, who was standing off to the side, her face pale. "And now, I'm your employer," I continued, my voice cold but calm. "And I'm going to make sure this place becomes something different, something better." I turned to the crowd again, then back to her. "Miss Wilson, I'm afraid your time here is up." I fired her quietly, without drama, without malice, just the cold, hard reality of it. And as she left the stage, I knew that the lesson had been learned, even if she hadn't quite understood it yet. The school was no longer just a place of education, it was a new beginning. I had built a support center for children with learning difficulties in the same building, a place where every child mattered, where no one would ever be called empty again. The sign at the entrance read, "Every child is important." And that, for me, was the real victory. The days following the dismissal of Miss Wilson were a whirlwind. As word spread throughout the school, reactions varied. Some teachers were nervous, unsure of what to expect from their new employer. Others were oddly excited, as though they sensed that things were about to change in a big way. I didn't waste time basking in the victory. There was too much to be done. The first order of business was to address the students. I knew that without them, the school would be nothing more than a building with empty classrooms and broken dreams. I wasn't just here to make a point. I was here to fix what had been broken. I visited classrooms, walked the halls, and met with students who had been struggling, who had fallen through the cracks of the system. Every conversation was a revelation. I listened to their stories, their fears, and their frustrations. These were kids who had been ignored or labeled as difficult or hopeless. They reminded me so much of myself. Some of the teachers were still holding on to their old ways, but there was a sense of uncertainty among them now. They weren't used to someone like me, someone who wasn't afraid to shake things up. I was a businessman, but I was also a man with a mission. A few weeks after the staff meeting, I called for another one. This time, the message would be clear. I wasn't going to tolerate mediocrity anymore. I would no longer allow the same cycles of failure to continue. The teachers gathered in the staff room, murmurs of uncertainty hanging in the air. I stood at the front, looking over the faces of the educators, some of whom had been in the same positions for decades. They were nervous, but I wasn't here to reprimand them. I was here to offer them a choice. "Let me be clear," I started, my voice firm. "The days of simply following the curriculum and hoping the students do well are over. This school is about results. It's about making sure every child succeeds. I don't care how long it takes or what it costs. We are going to transform this place, and you will either be part of that transformation or you'll be left behind." The room fell silent. I could see the tension in the air. Some teachers looked uneasy, but others looked intrigued. I had their attention. "We are going to implement a new approach, one that focuses on understanding each child, not just their grades. We will teach them how to think, how to solve problems, and most importantly, how to believe in themselves. No more labels, no more excuses." One of the teachers, an older man who had been there for years, spoke up, his voice shaky but defiant. "And what about the kids who just can't make it? What do we do with them?" I walked toward him, stopping just in front of his desk. "What do you mean by can't make it? Because believe me, I was one of those kids. I wasn't supposed to succeed, but I did, and so will they. All it takes is a little faith and a whole lot of work." I could see the skepticism in their eyes, but I wasn't concerned. I knew that once they saw the results, once they saw how this new approach could change everything, they would fall in line. That evening, I sat down in my office, my mind racing with ideas. There was so much to do, so much to change. But I wasn't worried. I had faced worse odds. I had been counted out before, and here I was, owning a school, shaping its future. But Miss Wilson's shadow still loomed large. She had been a constant presence in the building, even after her firing, and I knew she was struggling to let go of her old sense of power. I'd heard rumors about her trying to find a way back into the education world, trying to get a job at another school. It didn't surprise me. People like her rarely accept that their time is over. It was almost as if I could hear her voice in my head, echoing the same words she had said so many years ago. "Nothing will ever come of you. You are an empty place." But now that voice only fueled me. I wasn't empty. I was full, full of purpose, of ambition, and of the knowledge that I had the power to change lives. A few days later, I ran into her again. She was in the parking lot, standing by her old car, looking out of place like a relic from the past. I didn't want to make it seem like I was stalking her, but part of me couldn't resist the temptation to see how she was handling the fall from grace. I walked past her slowly, taking my time, but she caught my eye. For the first time since I'd taken control of the school, she looked at me directly, her gaze piercing. There was no sign of recognition, of course, but I could see that something in her was different. She had always been so sure of herself, so confident. Now she seemed deflated, almost defeated. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice cool. She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes flicked to the ground, then back to me. I just, I never thought it would end like this," she said, almost to herself. "I always thought I was doing the right thing." I leaned against the wall nearby, watching her carefully. "Maybe it's time you asked yourself what the right thing really is." She shot me a glance, her expression hardening. "And you think you know what that is? After all these years, you still think you can fix everything?" I met her gaze without flinching. "You never gave me the chance, but I'm fixing it now. Not just for me, but for all the kids you gave up on." There was a long silence between us. It wasn't the confrontation I had imagined all those years, but it was enough. She didn't speak again, and I didn't stay to wait for her response. I turned and walked away, feeling that familiar weight lifting off my shoulders. This was the turning point. I had taken the first step in rebuilding the school, but more importantly, I was rebuilding myself. This wasn't just about Miss Wilson. It wasn't even just about the school. It was about proving something to myself, that I was never the hopeless kid she had seen. I was more than that, and I was going to show the world just how much more. The days after that conversation with Miss Wilson felt like a turning point. I could almost feel the shift in the air. The walls of the school seemed different now, like they were no longer just a backdrop to the daily grind, but a canvas for something new. I had begun to feel like I was truly the one in charge, not just of the school, but of my own destiny. The students were starting to notice the change. There was a subtle shift in the way they spoke to me, the way they approached their work. I had set up a new mentorship program where every student, no matter their background, received personalized attention. We focused on their strengths, helped them discover new interests, and showed them that their potential wasn't limited by their past or their grades. The results were slow, but they were undeniable. The kids were coming alive in ways I hadn't imagined. But the real test was with the teachers. Some of them were beginning to embrace the changes. Others, however, remained resistant. I understood their hesitation. These were people who had been teaching for years, some even decades. They had their routines, their comfort zones, and now here I was, a man they barely knew, shaking everything up. I decided it was time for a deeper change. It wasn't enough to just tell them what I wanted. I needed to show them. So I began attending classes myself. I sat in the back, observing, asking questions. At first, the teachers were suspicious of my presence. But as time went on, they started to see that I wasn't there to criticize or micromanage. I was there to learn just as much as they were. One afternoon, I sat in on a history lesson. The teacher, Mrs. Lawson, was a veteran of the school, well-liked by the students but not particularly dynamic in her teaching methods. She stood at the front of the classroom, lecturing about the American Revolution, her voice monotone, her eyes distant. The students were disengaged, their eyes glazed over. I could see that they weren't absorbing anything. It was as if the lesson had become a formality, something to get through rather than something to inspire them. After class, I asked Mrs. Lawson to stay behind. "Mrs. Lawson," I began, "I noticed something in today's lesson. The kids weren't engaged. It felt more like a checklist than a conversation. Don't you think they deserve more?" She frowned. "I've been teaching this way for years. I know what works." "Do you?" I asked. "Because I can see how much potential these kids have. But they need more than just facts. They need to be challenged to think for themselves. History isn't just about dates and events. It's about understanding the world, the people, and how they shaped what we know today. We have to make them care." She hesitated, her pride wounded. "I don't know if I can change the way I've always done things." "You don't have to do it alone," I said, offering a solution. "Let's work together. I'll help you find ways to make this more engaging. We can bring in guest speakers, use real-world examples, make history come alive." She looked at me for a long moment, uncertainty in her eyes. "I'll try." It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. Mrs. Lawson agreed to implement some changes in her classes, and over time I saw the students starting to respond. The lessons became more interactive. The kids began asking questions, discussing ideas and even challenging each other. I knew it was only the beginning, but it was a step in the right direction. But not all battles were won so easily. One afternoon, I was meeting with a group of teachers in the conference room when the door opened and a figure stepped inside. It was Miss Wilson. She had come back to the school, as I suspected she would. I wasn't surprised, but I also wasn't prepared for the sharpness of her gaze. She stood there, her presence still commanding, her years of experience evident in the way she held herself. "I see you're still running things around here," she said, her tone cold. I nodded, my expression calm. "You can say that." She glanced around at the teachers gathered in the room, her eyes narrowing. "You've made some changes, I see. But you're still missing the point, Michael. You can't fix the broken kids with your fancy programs and your new age ideas. These kids are a reflection of the world they live in. You can't save them all." I could feel the old anger rising inside me, but I controlled it. She had no idea how much I had fought to get here, how much I had sacrificed to build what I had built. She had never believed in me, and now as I looked at her, tired, bitter, and stuck in the past, I saw that she still didn't. "You're right about one thing," I said, my voice steady. "I can't save them all, but I can give them the tools to save themselves. That's what matters." She laughed bitterly. "Tools? You think that's all it takes? A few tricks to make them believe in themselves?" I met her gaze, my eyes unwavering. "No, Miss Wilson, it's not tricks. It's hope. Something you never gave them. And that's where you failed." Her face hardened, and for a moment I thought she might lash out. But she didn't. Instead, she turned and walked out of the room, her footsteps echoing in the silence she left behind. I didn't chase her. I didn't need to. The school was mine now, and I was going to make it work, no matter what anyone said. That evening, I sat alone in my office, reflecting on everything that had led me to this point. The people who doubted me, the obstacles I had faced, the dreams I had fought for, it was all worth it. I was no longer the boy Miss Wilson had labeled as empty. I was the man who had rebuilt a school, a community, and most importantly, myself. And this was only the beginning. The weeks that followed felt like a blur. The changes I'd made to the school had begun to take root in a way that I hadn't anticipated. The teachers, although still wary, were slowly warming to the idea that the old ways didn't have to be the only way. Some of them came to me for advice on how to engage their students more effectively. Others, though, clung to their routines, believing that the system, the tradition, had to remain intact. But I wasn't here to preserve tradition. I was here to break it apart and rebuild something better. The next step was always going to be the hardest, putting my plan into motion without letting the past cloud my judgment. I had to stay focused on the future, on the potential that lay before me and the children I was now responsible for. I had to ignore Miss Wilson's words, the way she tried to make me feel small, and show her, once and for all, that I wasn't the same person I had been back then. One evening, I received a call. It was from one of my business contacts. They had come across an opportunity to invest in a private school that had been struggling financially. The principal, I was told, had a long track record of traditional, uninspiring education, and the school had been losing students for years. The name of the school hit me like a ton of bricks. Wilson Academy. I didn't need to hear more. The pieces clicked into place instantly. This was my moment. This was my chance to confront everything that had haunted me for years. I had to buy the school, not just for me, but for every kid Miss Wilson had ever called empty, for every student who had ever felt dismissed, forgotten, or invisible. I didn't tell anyone about my plan, not my staff, not my investors. The decision was mine alone. I worked quickly. Using the leverage I had built in the educational startup world, I bought Wilson Academy anonymously, quietly, and under the guise of a corporate investment. It was a clean, clinical transaction with no room for emotions to complicate things. I was no longer Michael, the insecure teenager looking for approval. I was Michael, the businessman with a vision. And the vision was simple: to take the school and transform it into something that Miss Wilson would never have dreamed of. I took my time. I met with the current teachers, observed the school's operations from the shadows, and began planning the changes. There was no rush. The only thing I had to do was wait for the right moment to make my move. The day arrived sooner than I expected. A general meeting had been called, with all the staff members gathered in the school's auditorium. I knew Miss Wilson would be there, sitting proudly at the front, as if she were still the undisputed authority. I also knew this was the moment when everything would change. The meeting began like any other. Miss Wilson was at the podium, her voice as smug and condescending as it had always been. The staff nodded along to her speeches about tradition, discipline, and the tried and tested methods of education. I sat in the back, unnoticed, biding my time. Finally, she finished her tirade and stepped back. The principal's face was a mask of superiority as she stood waiting for the next speaker. That's when I stood up. The room went silent. All eyes were on me as I walked to the front of the stage. "I'm sorry to interrupt," I began, my voice calm but filled with purpose. "But I believe it's time for a new chapter here at Wilson Academy." The staff exchanged confused glances, murmurs running through the crowd. Miss Wilson didn't move, but I could see her eyes narrow as she recognized the unfamiliar voice. She was trying to place me, trying to understand what was going on. "I am the new owner of this school," I said, the words dropping like a bomb. "And I intend to make it a place where every student has the opportunity to thrive, regardless of their background or their struggles." A murmur of surprise spread through the crowd. Miss Wilson stepped forward, her face flushed with anger. "You can't do this," she spat. "You can't just come in here and—" "I can," I interrupted, my voice steady. "And I will. This school has a future, but it will never reach its potential as long as you're in charge. You've been here too long, Miss Wilson. You've become part of the problem." Her eyes blazed with fury, but she didn't say anything. The silence between us felt like an eternity. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment I had dreamed about for so long. I turned to the staff, addressing them now. "You're here because you believe in education, or at least you used to. I want you to understand that this school is now a place where we will foster growth, creativity, and potential. We will empower our students, not limit them with outdated, rigid systems. And Miss Wilson? Well, she's had her time." I turned back to face Miss Wilson, who was seething with anger. "I'll be brief. Your contract is terminated. You're no longer the principal of this school. You'll have an opportunity to pack up and leave today." For a long moment, Miss Wilson stood frozen, her fists clenched at her sides. I saw the defeat in her eyes, the realization that she had lost control. It was a victory, but it wasn't about humiliating her. It was about the students, the kids who would never again feel like they were nothing. She didn't speak as she gathered her things and left the stage, but I could feel her resentment burning through the room. But I didn't care. She was a relic of a past that no longer mattered. As soon as Miss Wilson left, I made the announcement that would define the next chapter in this school's history. I am proud to announce the creation of a new support center for students with learning difficulties. It will be built right here, in this very building, and its goal will be to ensure that every child has the resources they need to succeed. There will be no more children who feel invisible, no more kids who think they're not good enough. The room erupted in applause. The staff looked at me with a mixture of surprise, relief, and cautious optimism. The students were going to get the chance they deserved. And for me, this was my redemption. I wasn't the broken child anymore. I was the man who had rebuilt it all. I turned to leave the stage, but as I did, I glanced one last time at the empty chair where Miss Wilson had sat. "And Miss Wilson," I said softly, almost to myself, "you still didn't understand anything.